8 dead women and 0 convictions. Do you think you can solve this case? Welcome back to Crime and Dine, a series where I cook and you listen. Today, we're going to be talking about the unsolved murders that were dubbed the Hammersmith Nude Murders. These murders were a set of truly horrific murders that took place in the 1960s. Initially, there were only 6 murders that were thought to have been committed by this perpetrator, but there ended up being a further 2 that were linked to these murders. So, since we don't know really anything about the killer, let's dive straight into the murders, shall we? Just want to start off by saying that all of the victims were sex workers. They were found naked and near the River Thames, which led to the killer being nicknamed Jack the Stripper by the media. That's always such a good way, isn't it, to start a case when we talk about the fact that the media is nicknamed the killer, which obviously just gives them a big fucking ego. So there we go. The first victim is thought to be Elizabeth Figg, who was a 21-year-old from Cheshire, England. Elizabeth's murder was actually linked after the initial 6 murders took place. She was found on the 17th of June 1959 in the early hours of the morning. Her body was discovered in a location called Duke's Meadow in Chiswick, and that's an area that was often dubbed as Lover's Lane. It was also an area that was known to sex workers, as they would often take their clients here. Elizabeth's body showed signs of strangulation, as there were marks around her neck. Her dress was torn at the waist and opened to expose her breasts. It was also determined that her bag, shoes and underwear were missing. These items were never found, even though the local area and riverbanks were scoured. At the time, police didn't know the identity of Elizabeth's body, as there was no personal identifying factors on her. A post-mortem picture of her face was sent to the media, and both her roommate and her mum reached out to the police to say that they recognised her. Can you imagine that? Seeing your daughter or your friend's face, well, dead face, in the newspaper, and that's how you found out that they were murdered. Insane. The only witness statement that the police managed to collect was of a pub landlord who was situated across the riverbank, and he claimed that he and his wife saw a car's headlights at 12:05 a.m. on the night of the murder. These headlights turned off, and shortly after they heard a woman screaming. Now, this statement is consistent with what the pathologist concluded about Elizabeth's time of death, which was between midnight and 2 a.m. The second murder was also one that was linked after the initial 6 murders, and that was the slaying of 22-year-old Gwyneth Rees from Barry in Wales. Again, a reminder that all of these victims were sex workers, which does not mean that they asked for this or that they deserved this. Gwyneth was found on the 8th of November 1963 in a refuse disposal site in Mortlake. This was only 1 mile from Duke's Meadows, where Elizabeth's body was found. She was dumped as though she was just some fucking rubbish that meant nothing. It's utterly heartbreaking, and it really does speak volumes to the killer's opinion of sex workers and women in general. Gwyneth was naked apart from a single stocking on her right leg that stopped at her ankle. Workmen in the area had actually accidentally capacitated Gwyneth's body with a shovel. 30-year-old Hannah Telford from Headon on the Wall was the third victim of this merciless killer. She was found on the 2nd of February 1964 on the Thames foreshore below a sailing club. Hannah was a mother of 2 children, and she was actually pregnant with her third at the time that she was murdered. No child should have a parent snatched away from them, let alone in such a brutal way. Interestingly, several of Hannah's teeth were actually missing, and her underwear was stuffed into her mouth. The fourth victim was 25/26-year-old Irene Lockwood from Walkringham in Nottinghamshire. She was found on the 8th of April 1964, also on the Thames foreshore in Chiswick, close to where Hannah's body had been found. Devastatingly, Irene was also pregnant at the time of her death. This fourth victim made the police realise that there was actually a serial killer in the local area terrorising West London. The reason they didn't think this before was because they thought that Hannah's murder was a suicide, and also because they basically didn't want to look into it because all of these victims were sex workers, and sex workers apparently have no value to the police, which is just disgusting. Another body was found on the 24th of April 1964 in Brentford in an alleyway. This was then determined to be the body of 22-year-old Helen Bartholomew from Ormiston in Scotland. With Helen's death came the biggest breakthrough of the case so far, and this was that there were flecks of paint discovered on her body. Now, these flecks of paint were actually found to be the same kind of paint that is used in car manufacturing. Due to this, the police then decided that they would double down on this information and attempt to trace this paint back to a local business in the area. 30-year-old Mary Fleming from Clydebank in Scotland was found on the 14th of July 1964 in an area in Chiswick. Building on Helen's murder, paint flecks were also discovered on Mary's body, cementing to the police that this was the same killer. Neighbourly accounts on the street that Mary's body was found stated that they heard a car reversing down the street moments before her body was found. The next victim was Frances Brown. Now, I couldn't actually find whether she was from Glasgow or Edinburgh, as different sources said different things, but she was definitely Scottish. Frances was 21 at the time of her murder. With Frances, though, there was actually an account of when she was last seen, which was on October 23rd, 1964. She was seen by a colleague getting into a client's car, and that was the last time that she was seen alive. Her body wasn't discovered until the 25th of November 1964 in a car park in Horton Street in Kensington. She was found to have been strangled. Frances's colleague had actually been able to give a description of the client that she had last been seen with, and a description of the car that she got into, which was thought to be a grey Ford Zephyr. The stripper's final victim is thought to be Bridget O'Hara, who was affectionately referred to as Bridie by friends and family. Bridget was originally from Dublin in Ireland and was 27 at the time that she had her life stolen from her. Her body was found on the 16th of February 1965 in a storage shed in a trading estate in Acton. Pathologists said that her body showed signs of being kept in a warm environment, which would actually make sense as her body was found near an electrical transformer which would emit heat. Paint flecks would also be found under the transformer, again making sense due to the fact that the trading estate was situated opposite a paint spraying shop. From this, the police took that information and ran like the fucking wind with it. John DeRose was put in charge of the investigation. He had interviewed over 7,000 suspects in these murder cases, but came up empty-handed. After the discovery of Bridget O'Hara's body and the fact that the estate was positioned opposite a paint spraying shop, John DeRose decided that it would be the most fantastic idea to give a press conference. Now, in this press conference, DeRose falsely stated that the police had narrowed the suspect pool down to 20 people, of which they were going through the process of elimination one by one. This was just simply not true. They were genuinely no closer to finding out who the real killer was, and did not actually have a suspect pool that was smaller than 7,000, really. And this was due to the lack of evidence that they had. Following this, he gave another 2 press conferences. In the second, he said that the suspect pool was now down to 10, and in the third, he stated that they were now only looking at 3 people as suspects in the Hammersmith Nude Murders. After the first press conference, there was said to be no more known Jack the Stripper killings. There is a theory, though, that the victims knew each other in some kind of way, as they were possibly part of some lucrative underground party scene in London. And some of the victims were known to take part in some porn films, and it's thought that the killer may have also been part of this scene, but there's not really any solid evidence to support this. There were a few main suspects whose names came up time and time again. First suspect was Kenneth Archibald. Kenneth was a 57-year-old caretaker at the Holland Park Lawn Tennis Club who walked into Notting Hill Police Station on the 27th of April 1964 and confessed to the murder of Irene Lockwood. He was arrested and charged with her murder. Kenneth Archibald's trial was held in June 1964 at the Old Bailey, but shortly after it commenced, he decided to rescind his confession and pleaded not guilty to murdering Irene. He was found not guilty by the jury and acquitted by the judge due to insufficient evidence linking him to the murder. The next suspect was a Scottish security guard called Mungo Ireland. He was initially linked to the murders after Bridget O'Hara's murder, as he worked as a security guard on the trading estate where her body was found. John DeRose, the head investigator of this case at Scotland Yard, had actually nicknamed him Big John, and this was the pseudonym that he used for Mungo Ireland. He actually referred to him in an interview with the BBC in 1970 as a respectable married man in his 40s. Mungo was DeRose's top suspect, and he was convinced that he had committed these murders. Shortly after he was connected to the killings, Mungo committed suicide via carbon monoxide poisoning. He left a note to his wife that read, "I can't stick it any longer. To save you and police looking for me, I'll be in the garage." The Hammersmith Nude Murders were since briefly looked into again by Scotland Yard between the years of 2006 and 2007. They had actually discovered documents that detailed Mungo being in Scotland at the time of O'Hara's death. However, investigators do believe that these documents may have been falsified and claim that he is most likely Jack the Stripper. Another suspect was Freddie Mills, a lightweight boxing champion in London. A former gangster turned author, Jimmy Tippett Jr., was researching for his book about London ganglands and claimed that he discovered evidence that Freddie Mills was the killer. He claimed that other London gangsters at the time suspected this and that it was supposedly well known in the West End. In July of 1965, Freddie was actually found dead in his car, supposedly due to suicide by gunshot. The last suspect that we're going to discuss was a man named Harold Jones, who was originally from Wales. He was a convicted killer. When he was 15, he murdered 2 girls and was sentenced to life in prison. He was released on good behaviour from Wandsworth Prison at the age of 35, and he eventually moved to Fulham in London. Apparently, Hammersmith Murders bear a striking resemblance to his first 2 murders, with absolutely no signs of sexual assault, but extreme violence. Harold died in 1971. There are just so many theories as to who the killer is, but nothing concrete. Let me know what your opinions are of this case and what you think happened. If you enjoyed listening to this, make sure to join the community and follow along to hear more cases like this. You can pop on the notification bell so you get notified when I upload. You can also find me on TikTok at Crime and Dine Time, or you can find me on Spotify at Crime Time with Tara. Thank you for listening.